You just found the perfect product that helps with staying cool during hot summer runs. No more gross warm water. Stay cool with this product from Gear Handle. This hydration tube cover helps keep your water cool and easily accessible. Stay hydrated during those long summer runs or even delay from freezing in the winter. Plus, they're compatible with various brands of water bladders and come in various colors. Visit gearhandle.com and use promo code H2O today.
Coming up on the Payoff, I am so excited about our next guest, which we'll have to wait to hear from till next week because some stuff came up and we had to cancel, which was my fault because I always wait till the last minute to tape these things. Not always, but sometimes. So anyway, a lot of times when you go on other podcasts, if you have a podcast, which seems like everybody has a podcast, they'll ask you, hey, can you share it on your feed? And I was lucky enough to get invited on the Busy Living Sober podcast. I had planned on putting this up on my feed. It's basically my story, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So this is my story. I'm a drunk. Thank God I'm sober. I am in the bonus round of life, and that is illustrated over the course of the next, 50 minutes or so. So enjoy it, and I want you to hear this. This is a perfect wave acoustic version, just part of it, as it leads into a conversation I had with Elizabeth Chance a couple months ago. Podcast is from a couple months ago. Story is evergreen. Hope you guys don't hate it. Kevin Souza.
Standing by the ocean floor.
So getting busy, living sober. So the funny thing is that I met Pete. How many years ago did I meet you? 8 years ago?
Well, you met me before that. I remember you. You don't remember me because I tried to get sober a couple times. So now I remember going into a meeting and because, you remember the attractive girls when you're a guy that goes to meetings. So I was like, oh, yeah, look at that. So I remember you. And I remember, we have connections I went to grade school with your sister and your brother. And so, I knew who you were probably before you knew who I was. But, we met, I guess I went to rehab and then an extended care place and was working in North Jersey and New York. And then I moved back home probably a year and a half sober. So probably 7.5 years ago. Yeah.
We met and it was like, it's like he's my little brother. I swear I love him.
Sure.
And he has an amazing story. And since day one, I remember you I was getting certified as a recovery coach. You're like, I might do that. Let's do that.
We sat down and talked about it. And it was one of those things. It was like when I always tell people, it's like when I was talking to my sponsor, it was like you have white light moments. And I remember exactly where I was sitting and I felt so good talking about doing stuff like that. Yeah, you do a great job of recruiting people and making it look very attractive.
Well, will you tell us what it was like, what happened?
Yeah. You want me to just start? Start?
Start, and if I feel like interrupting, I'll interrupt you, but I hope not to interrupt you because your story is really fascinating. And I wanted to say one thing to the listeners. He's got to put on the part when you were standing in that dark spot and somebody very big and tall came and touched you, and he's very big and tall.
Yeah. You ask me any questions you want, by the way, along the way. But I always tell people, first of all, my sobriety date is November 7th, 2011. Alcoholism is all over my dad's side of the family. It's all over it. And, people would say, I've heard this before in meetings, alcoholism doesn't run in my family, it gallops. And that's and my dad's side of the family, was definitely the case. But I had a great existence as a kid. I had two older brothers who kind of paved the way for me socially. And then my dad and mom did an incredible job. They did the best they could, which I grew up, same place you did, right outside of Philadelphia on the main line. It was a good place to live. It's not a bad place to grow up. So, I don't know. Although there was alcoholism around, my dad was a functional alcoholic. Like when he came home, I always say the records would skip. Like when he came home from work, people knew he was home. You get tight and he'd be yelling about a cushion not being on the couch. And it was a very, like, sometimes a stressful environment to grow up in. But at the same time, he was very loving. He was always there. He always showed up. He was just a very functional alcoholic, He never really got deep. Just wasn't his deal, old school guy. And, but there was alcoholism there. But I always say the first time I ever experienced drugs or alcohol, I was a feisty kid, and I had ADD, and I was like beginning kind of at the forefront of that movement where they were describing kids. This is like the mid 80s. So kids were getting prescribed, or they were getting diagnosed as ADD and prescribed like Ritalin. And I can remember going to the principal's office at St. Thomas Good Counsel outside of Philadelphia to get the Ritalin at lunch. And I can remember taking it and feeling like I have a vision, an overall vision of taking that and feeling like turned on. I mean, not every day, but I definitely remember, like, after the principal's office, I'll feel better. And just like I did after I woke up in the morning and I took it. And it was a couple things, I think, we're looking back now, just with the experience and the knowledge I have through recovery. I felt like I always had to take something to be something, which was a screwed up feeling. Like it really played on that less than thing that I had going as a young alcoholic. And, too, there was that affected me differently than I think it did the average person. People take those medicines and medications and they work for them. That was not the case for me. I'm not saying it didn't work, but it definitely made me feel, very different, and it turned on me down the road, and that's, I'll get to that. But, so that's the first, like, controlled substance I remember taking and feeling a reaction from it. And then I got to high school, and one of the things I always say too is when I was in 8th grade, I was really nervous going to dances, going to like the St. Thomas dance. That's where I went to school. Or God forbid I went to a dance at another school. I was like, oh my God, this is like, I couldn't believe people would do this. How do you talk to girls? Or I don't know what to do. And I mean, I literally felt like the biggest loser, like, for whatever reason. And we do this as people today. We give other people superpowers. Like the kid from the other school that's popular, I decided he was Superman, and I was just like some peasant. And I made up my mind that was the case. And so that was it. And so the next year when I started to drink, I became Superman. Like, I can remember. Good.
I want to go back to something.
Yeah.
But the one thing you skipped is that you were a really good athlete. That's a huge thing I want to put out there. So you have ADHD, at least the people have said you have that, even though you're just a boy and have a lot of energy. So you have ADHD, and they're giving you Ritalin or whatever it is, and you're going, and then you're also playing these sports, and you're like a rock star athlete. I mean, Pete is an amazing athlete. So I don't want to forget about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's a huge part of my story. And part of that too, Biz, is that, I started to drink, in 9th grade and sophomore year in high school. And that's when I really started to kind of experience success playing sports, on the high school level, when you're like, okay, maybe this is something I want to continue to do. And, maybe I'll have the skills to do it. But the moment I started to drink, the athletics, the love for the athletics took a backseat, and the drinking became the number one. And the drinking and the girls, right? Because alcohol let me talk to girls. And it gave me the ability to, I thought I needed it to talk to women and stuff like that, because it made me nervous. But then, to what you're saying, I started to play sports, and I started to get good at football, and I started to get recruited to play football in college. And I was like, whoa. And that's another thing too. Like, there was a lot of ego involved. I loved the adulation that came. I loved the adulation that came with being a good athlete more so than I did the competition. And that was not the case early on in my life. I loved the competition. But now I saw that I was, the good feeling I was getting from that, it just pumped my ego up. So, I get a scholarship, and I'm going to play at the University of Richmond because I got a full scholarship, and I'm going to play in an all-star game, a city all-star game. And this doctor is giving me a physical, and he's like, hey man, your heart is beating like irregularly. You have some kind of arrhythmia. So if you're going to play in this game, you got to see a cardiologist. I want you to get checked out. So I went down to Penn. This doctor, Evan Lowe, looked at me. And I remember the moment I was on the treadmill getting the EKG, getting the stress test. And I remember this guy, Dr. Lowe, looking at his assistant, this woman named Kim, who was awesome. And they both were like, we got a situation here. I remember thinking like something is wrong with me. And, consultation, they talked to me. I was told I had cardiomyopathy and I wasn't going to be able to play football. This was my identity. And the real alcoholic part of this comes into play when I'm asked, or I'm told, you could have gotten this one of two ways. It could have been viral, where your body has an illness for so long, the illness goes away, like a flu, and the flu goes away and your body starts to attack your organs. That's viral cardiomyopathy. Or you could have gotten it by abuse of drugs and alcohol. And, all over the course of the second half of my senior year, I discovered prescription drugs. My mom is like a normal person. So she would get a prescription for codeine or whatever, and just like, she wouldn't finish it. Well, I discovered this like treasure trove when I was a senior, and I would go into high school flying. I would take these red capsules called Tylox. I would be like out of my mind, and nobody knew. I was like the superstar athlete. So, and then I would take Ritalin when I was in school, and then we'd smoke pot afterwards, and then we'd drink in the middle of the week. And all this time I'm working out, and it damaged my heart. I believe it still could have, there's a possibility it could have been viral, but I'm no dummy as far as I'm accountable in this whole thing.
So were you ever scared or do you think that because at such a young age you were introduced a pill that it was okay? Because weren't you scared? Like, I would be petrified if I went into, because when I grew, I'm a little bit older than you, so parents weren't. Yeah. Parents weren't doing, you know what I mean? And nobody got the ADHD. You were just the kid that was always in trouble, right?
Yeah.
There was no ADHD in my era. So were you scared at all when you saw that codeine or whatever you were taking?
No, I did not think anything of it. I really, and that's also like the disease part, right? I mean, it's like, no, I was not scared. I was excited. I've felt like I had, and I really was so screwed up. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it at first. I thought I just figured it out. I was like, oh, good. This is great. I figured this out. I mean, I'm still social. I had no clue. I mean, there's nothing dumber than like a 17-year-old junkie. I mean, there is not, because junkies are dumb to begin with. And when I was a 17-year-old without any stuff, I was dumb. So there's just nothing, it was crazy. Yeah. So I'll go on. I couldn't play sports, and one thing you said when you asked me if I was ever scared, and I was never scared in my heart because I didn't allow myself time to get scared of anything because I knew alcohol or drugs could take away that fear. So I was just constantly, I managed in high school, in college. I was a pothead. I stayed away from uppers probably 95% of the time in college because I was scared about my heart. I was like, okay, I need to respect that. But I got so drunk all the time. And, I was actually dating a girl, right? When I I wasn't dating women then. I was dating a girl, and I was a senior in college, and I really liked her. But I was at her dorm room once, and she went to school in Nashville. And is that her? No. So anyways, I like convinced her to give me an Adderall or whatever, because we've been drinking all day. And I remember taking that as a senior, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I found it again. It was the same feeling like I did when I was a senior in high school. And so I was really hooked on speed from that moment forward, because I found something that I could drink as much as I wanted to with.
And that didn't give you that heart racing feeling at all, that you were like, oh my gosh, this isn't good?
If it ever did, I would just like double or triple my alcohol consumption, which was already skyrocketing. Look at you shake your head as the phone rings. People are calling you. You can't get mad at them. You're a popular person.
Busy living, right? Getting busy, and she's just like trying to ignore everything.
So look, basically, no, the heart racing feeling never really happened to me because I was always like drinking so much, so mellowed out. And honestly, I was asymptomatic. That's a big part of my story. So I was still always running. I looked healthy. And I was still pretty much active, but I managed, I got through college because I was affiliated with the football team. And I had great resources there. And those guys, one, they don't want the kid who's getting a free ride. They kept me on scholarship because they're great guys. My coach, this guy, Jim Reed, kept me on scholarship, but they were also not going to let the guy that basically was just coasting, like not graduate or fail. Like they were like, this guy's not gonna get in trouble. Like, let's just get him the hell out of here. So they made sure I went to class. I was affiliated with the team. I filmed practice, but I would film practice. I would smoke pot before most of the practices. I'd go out there and film. I'd do a terrible job. I would like impersonate coaches on the film. They would hear me. It was a circus. We had one guy, the guy who's the defensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars who recruited me. This guy named Joe Cullen was our defensive line coach at the time at Richmond. And I remember him looking up at me in the tower when I was filming. I think I had my shirt off and I had my feet up. I had flip-flops on. And he's like, this is a circus, and it kind of was. But I made incredible, and it's cool too, getting sober and reaching out to people like Coach Cullen and letting them know him. So, that is like one of the greatest rewards. I've reconnected with everybody from the Richmond football program. So anyways, to get back on track, I get out of high school. I mentioned that I was, or got out of college, I graduated. I mentioned that I kind of rediscovered prescription drugs, and I was off to the races. I got a job. I lived in Philly for like about 3 or 4 months. There was a lot of ecstasy involved in that time. It was like 1999, 2000. And I remember that's the one drug I can really remember taking. And I loved it, but I was like, it's making me dumber. The next day I would just be like, look at that. Yeah.
Like I got hit by a train. What was it?
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about it today. It's like the next day you go for a run or you go to play tennis, like even 2 days later, you'd be like, what the hell is wrong with my body? Yeah. So luckily, and this is one of the things too, I thought I was very entitled, born on third base, thought I had a triple. I heard somebody else say that, raised in a good area, good enough athlete where he got a scholarship. I had 2 brothers paved the way for me socially. I did not understand gratitude and I certainly didn't understand hard work. And I got another opportunity. I got moved to New York when I was probably 6 months out of college. I worked with one of my best friends. We worked in New York City, and it was incredible. I moved up there. The moment I was walking down like 7th Avenue in New York, I was like, that rush in itself, it was like, again, it's like the fall of like 1999. I'm like walking down New York. I was like, holy, like I want to be here forever. This is all I want to do. And because it was an adrenaline rush, and this is without drugs. Then I started to do drugs, and it was game over. And, I started to, there was a lot of coke involved. And I won't tell you there was just a lot involved. And, it was just my addictive personality, just like the speed. The moment I did that, I was like, well, I'm going to do this forever, for the rest of my life. And so I partied basically the company I was working for got bought out. Things got better. I was living on the Upper East Side of New York City, 63rd between Park and Lex at 22. I had no clue. How good I had it. And, I just partied my way right out of the city, right back home. Basically I like they didn't want me to work there anymore. I moved to Boston. We moved to Boston. Then I pioneered to move back to New York because I loved to party there. And finally this company was like, things had gotten bad and they started to lose money and people were getting let go. And they were like, all right, you can go too, dude. And it was weird because I was at the forefront of this company, for a while. It wasn't very big, but things were going very well for a little bit. And, so that was one of those things too, another ego blow. You drink on that. But this is the first time I discovered recovery. I'm back home and, my parents, I'm living with my parents now because I've got nothing. And I'm kind of like keeping up a little bit of like a shell game. Like I remember telling somebody I was going to grad school. I had no clue what I was going to do. It's like, I'm going to go to grad school and be a psychologist. And this person who I told was sober. And they were like, this guy's like out of his mind. Like nobody needs him as a psychologist. And so anyways, I got a DUI. When I was living with my parents, fell asleep like normal people do. And I stole the keys to one of the cars. I drove down to the city to party. I drove the car up on a medium, and I, had a consequence with the law, and that started my whole experience in recovery. I wasn't ready, but I was like, I need to stop, because I came home the next morning, my mom was bawling, crying, the jig was up, right? So I started to go to meetings, and this is 2002. And, my life started to change. I got a sponsor. I was believing in the program. I was probably sober, stone cold sober for 90 days. And then I was at a party. And my friends knew that I was sober, that I was so messed up. They weren't going to allow me to drink, but I talked them into letting me smoke pot with them one day, because I just wasn't all in the program. I go to meetings, 12-step meetings, and, AA, I'm not a representative of the program, but it certainly has worked for me. And I was never all the way in. And so I wanted to be a part of, I felt like I was left out with my friends. I was young, I wasn't ready, it wasn't God's plan. Luckily, I made it back. A lot of people have that story where they go out and they die, because I would have died or gotten sober. There's no alternative for me, because I kind of put my life back together. And in a sense where I stopped drinking I stopped drinking for a year, but like for, 9 months, I'm smoking pot. And I got a job in Colorado working for USA Basketball. And I get to Colorado, the moment the plane touches down, I start to drink again. Like, sort of manageable. It's like the first time you drink, it's not like the sirens aren't ringing. They don't show up right away, but eventually they do, right? Yeah. Yeah. So
I might as well do it. Nothing bad's happened. Look, I had one. There's no metal around my wrist. There's nobody chasing me.
yeah. I mean, all it takes is one night for the shit not to hit the fan. And that's all an alcoholic like me needed. And I literally continued to manage some success. I got a job, like I said, at USA Basketball, and I traveled around parts of the world to go with, like, I was like the main public relations contact for this women's basketball team. I remember it was funny. I remember we went to Puerto Rico, and I really started to drink there because we were in a pretty cool hotel. We stayed in Miami, we stayed in Denver, we stayed in Puerto Rico, and I kept it together. I mean, I did a really good job, but I was definitely drinking, hitting it hard at night, and that was like kind of I remember thinking like, this is getting bad. Like, because every night I was drinking because I was on my own. And I got a job in Charlotte doing PR for the Hornets, the basketball team there. And then I really got back into the drugs there a little bit, and not a little bit, I did. And yeah, and I was probably about to lose my job there. Again, I was doing public relations there. You're traveling with the team. You're having contact with all the guys. While I was there, Michael Jordan bought the team. Like, you're having interactions with him, limited, but I mean, you're around him, and it was amazing. It was a great experience, and I'm happy that I was kind of with it for a portion of, a good portion of that experience. But then I got a job in Philly working for the Sixers, so I'm back with all my old haunts, all my old stomping grounds, and my friends could tell I was screwed up. They could tell, like, I was going back down to the city and partying. I moved to a place down in the city. I reconnected with a woman that I went to college with. Awesome person now. She was actually in a phase in her life where she just was going to party for a little while. I was in like, this is where I live. Like, you're perfect for me. And eventually she was like, dude, like, you got to stop, or we can't, like, see each other anymore. And we didn't see each other anymore because I didn't stop. And but I always tell people too, lower companions, right? Like, you're with this girl, then you're with this girl, because you want to be with people who do things like you do them. Sorted places, lower companions. That's where I found myself. And I had no clue what was going on with me. And then I fell ass backwards. I lost the job with the Sixers. They eliminated my position, but I mean, like, they just wanted to eliminate me. I can promise you that. And I had made a lot of great friends there. And I've made a lot of incredible reconnections there in the 9.5 years since I've been sober, which has been like unbelievable. Because some of those people have really helped me along my way. And, and we'll talk about that because I'm about to get to the recovery. I was in Charlotte. I got a job back in Charlotte, working for the Hornets, doing radio for them. I continue to talk my way into stuff, you know? And I mean, then it got awful. It got awful down there. And, you know, I told Biz mentioned the story. We were, the Bobcats were in the playoffs. They were, now they're the Hornets. They were the Bobcats at the time. Michael Jordan owned the team. And I was doing like, I did like radio and radio sideline reporting. And I was down by the court. And it was the first playoff game in franchise history. And for the Bobcats, and I was down by the court, and Michael Jordan walked by me, and he kind of just put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't know, like, hey, Pete, what's up? It wasn't like that. It was like, hey, I know you work for me. What's up, man? I'm trying to get to my seat. And I remember he patted my back, and I was under the influence at the time. And I remember being like, oh my God, like, what, you know, like, what's going on, you know? And it's like, this is the greatest player of all time. He's a cool dude. He's just like he's just being smooth. And the team that I worked for, you know, back as a PR guy, I worked there for the first year ever. Now they're in the playoffs. I'm broadcasting, which is my dream. And all I wanted was a vodka tonic to even things out, you know? And that's where it takes us, you know? And, you know, I ended up back at home, and now I'm 33, and I try to go back to meetings again, and I couldn't stop. You know, I was like unable to stop drinking, and that was so scary. And you know, my buddy tells a story, like I went over to his house. I went over to my friend Murph's house. He's sober too. I mean, he's a sober guy I talk to pretty much every day. When we both weren't sober, he was like with normal people, like living a normal life. Like, and I'd convinced him to let me over and come hang at his house. And I showed up. This was a month before I got sober. I showed up with this girl I was dating. Me and this girl should not have been dating one another, but we show up at his house. We create a scene, you know, as he tells it, like I broke up with the girl at the party. There's like normal people there at this party, you know, and people that aren't like me. And he's got this big, nice house. And he basically tells me and this woman to leave. And we leave and we back the car up into the creek at his house. So, and it was a long story, but there's other people that were showing up at his house. And he was like, you just got to leave, dude. Like, get out of here. And the next morning I went to his house, and, you know, they're taking a tow truck is getting this car out of a creek in his house because we had to take a cab home. And I'm like, hey man, can we like keep this between us? And he's like, dude, like, so I holed up with that girl, and somehow my brother Michael got her phone number, and he called me on her phone. And that's one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, how does he have this girl's number? What is going on? You know, it's like, oh, she's like, it's your brother. I'm like, what? You know, my cell phone wasn't working anymore. Yeah, my cell phone wasn't working anymore because I lost it when we went in the creek. And guess what? I wasn't paying the bill either. But when my phone rang, you know, Young Jeezy played. I didn't have a job. I had no money, and my ringtone is Young Jeezy. So, I mean, talk about insanity. So my brother basically sat me down and was like, if you don't stop drinking, and he had my parents on board too. So we all sat down in the living room at my parents' house. He's like, you're not going to see anybody. He's like, you're not going to see me. You're not going to see mom. You're not going to see dad. You're not going to see Lily, who's his daughter. And he said, you're not going to see Cade. And Cade was his stepson who he was having problems with at the time. And I remember thinking, like, he didn't even want me to see Cade. Like, God, this is awful. That was like the last straw, I think. So that's when I really tried to get sober. One night I went to a meeting, and I was actually still drinking, but I was trying. And this guy, actually, Matt, was like, hey, I'm going to pick you up, and we'll go to a meeting. And he didn't want to go to a meeting. He took me to dinner. And we go to dinner at the White Dog in Wayne. I think it was the White Dog. I was out of it. And he's like, you know, he tells me his story, and his story included going to rehab. And I like this guy. I wanted what he had. And he's like, I think you should go to rehab. And I remember I was like, okay. And and the moment I said okay, and I made that decision, I didn't stop drinking for another week, because the typical alcoholic fashion. I'm like, give me 1 week, you know? And I made up some lie to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, and party for like the last week, which was a weird week. But nonetheless, I came back home. And they say too in our literature in the big book, right? It's so crazy. You can try to, you know, an alcoholic in the late stages of addiction, his life is this, or her, it's this big, right? Like it's big as your pinky, but like you're clawing and fighting to keep that life. That's the disease and the insanity of it. Like everybody, hopefully, is trying to give you help. There's so many hands reaching out, and all you're like, I got it, I'm good. And your life is a disaster, right? And like that is so awful. And the literature says, you know, let the alcoholic think it's their idea. And I went home from that dinner with my parents. I was like, I got an idea. I'm going to go to rehab. And they were like, no shit. They're like, thank God. They're like, get in the car, you know? They couldn't get me there fast enough. And my friends, the Rogers, who were affiliated with Karen, they got me like fast tracked as fast as I would allow. And I had a bed there, and I went to Karen, and my life completely changed. I mean,
I want to go back to something.
yeah.
Most people that are on the track you were on and everything's imploding around them, they don't really care. They're like, okay, next, I'm good. I'm good. And did you have any shame? There was no like, oh my God, I'm not one of them, or because there's so much shame that's associated with addiction, right? There's so much. It's like the whole thing. I remember when people would talk about, I'm like, an alcoholic. I mean, that's like I work for, like, I got a job with, like, listen, you like, you've been working with like Michael Jordan. Like, I am not one of those people that hide, right? I mean, but you were. And how were you so accepting of that?
Well, I think I would explain it like this. As if I had a nickel to leverage against getting sober, I would leverage that nickel. And, you know, one day I was totally out of nickels. I mean, I had the gift of desperation. I had no money. I had no job. I was going to be cut off from everybody, you know, and I will say, look, I'm not a therapist or, you know, a mental health expert, but I do know, because I've asked the therapist what the best thing is, you know, cutting off your family, as I was told and as I experienced, when your family, you know, cutting somebody off that's really messed up like I was, it worked for me. I hate to say that because it's different for everybody. But when my parents were like, hey, well, you're not going to see us. My brother was like, you're not going to see Cade. I was like,
Believed them. You were like,
believe
Michael. Like
I did.
You believed Michael. Like he was not trying to manipulate you, and he was just
no. They didn't want me around. Yeah.
I mean, because were they going to kick you out of the house? Because so many people do this, and the person's like, yeah, whatever. Whatever, but I don't believe you.
Yeah, I think like, and that's the thing. I believe they were. My brother Kevin he's really good at being. I mean, he's one of my best friends in the world, but he's good at being a dick when he wants to. And he you know, both my brothers are sober, and Kevin was a great example. He's like, look, dude, he's like, I'm not going to talk to you. He's like, until you get sober, he's like, I'm basically accepting the fact that you're a dead man walking. And that was hard to hear. So all these people really kind of eventually told me how it was. And that's what I needed. And the one recommendation too that I got from somebody, because you get these calls too, right? What do I do? My son can't stop drinking. How do I get him help? You know, yada, yada. What's the plan? And, you know, for me, I call people like you, or I call another mental health professional, and they say, I remember the best advice I ever got was like, just wait until the moment they come to you and say, I need help. Because if they're really that screwed up, at some point they'll have a horrible night, or they'll be completely broken, and they'll say, I need help. And man, if you have the resources, have a game plan ready right then and there, in place. The car's ready to go. We got you a bed here. We're going to make the phone call. We've had it reserved. Let's go. Because if you give the alcoholic 24 hours, they're going to wake up and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm good.
I know. How did you go for that week? I mean, you said they said, all right, we're going. And you're like, I'll be back. I'll be back.
You know what? And it kind of worked, because again, it was like, and again, I was really lucky that I didn't die during that week, because I was in the red zone. But I think that it was the fact that it goes back to like, just let him, if whatever gets you there, you know, once somebody is accepting and makes a plan, whatever gets you where, like, you hear the stories like, okay, well, the guy showed up to rehab. He's wasted. He drank a bottle of Jack. Who gives a shit? We got him there. He's in a rehab now. You know, like that was, I was loaded when I showed up. my mom was like embarrassed. You know, this is the same woman who would clean up our house before the cleaning lady came. So dropping her son off to rehab being wasted, I'm like, rehab, who cares? Like, this is it. So to pick up, that's, you know, this is when the recovery really, I get to rehab and my life starts to change. I was done. I was done. And I started to believe in a power greater than myself. You know, I was slow getting there, but I did because I knew that I wasn't the boss anymore. My best thinking had gotten me into a treatment center at 33 or 34, and you know, I talked about people like you don't need to be rich, right? You don't need to have a Rolls Royce. You don't need to have a condo in Palm Beach and a home in Rye, New York. What you need is self-esteem. Like, and so I started to do things, esteemable acts. And that gave me self-esteem. I couldn't believe it. I was doing the next right thing and I was feeling different. You know, a good example of that is that girl that I was dating, that I was with in the Creek. You know, she came to visit me at the treatment center. And she was just, look, man, we partied. She showed up, she wasn't in good shape. And I was sober for 2 weeks. And I did not like the way it made me feel, like her being there. And I remember I was in the chapel at Karen and I was like, God, I need you to help me ask this person to leave, you know? And I was like, look, we can't do this anymore. Like, I need you to leave. And that was like so hard. I'd never done anything hard like that sober for a very long time, maybe ever. And she got up and she walked out. I mean, look, I was no winner at the time on paper anyways, good for her. But she got up and she walked out. And when she left, I was like, oh my God, I feel good about that. Like, she left. It was very hard to do that. So I was like, oh my gosh, it gives me self-esteem. I'm starting to get the feelings I got from getting screwed up, like by doing the right things. And, you know, the next example of that was when I went to, you know, you get done and they're like at a rehab like that. And if you're like super fucked up, like I was, pardon my language, like they're like, you cannot go home. Like, we need you to stay here. And they recommended that I go to an extended care place. And I was like, you know, I battled for a little bit, but then I was like, okay, I'll go. Like, whatever. And I went there and my life, again, just continued to open up. I went to a meeting today and talked about this, you know. I didn't have anything going, but I was going to 3 meetings a day. I had a sponsor. And, you know, in those recovery communities, it's like that tribal community. They talk about like old school Indians, like that tribe, that like that power, that force that you get from that communal behavior. And that's what I got. And by being around those other people that wanted to talk about recovery, I continued to kind of feel fulfilled spiritually. And I was like, this is working. I am now getting the feeling I got from booze and drugs from talking recovery with other guys and maybe helping other people. And a good example of my willingness to turn everything over and actually go to any lengths was, you know, we had to get jobs there. And Biz, you know this story. I was like, I'm not getting a job because I saw guys were working at like, you know, McDonald's and like, you know, I'm 33 now and I had a job. I was working in the NBA, you know, rubbing elbows with big time people. And you want me to go work at a 7-Eleven? I'm like, it ain't happening, dude. And they're like, okay, like we're going to throw you out. And I was like, you know, I wanted to keep this job. I wanted to keep this thing going because I knew it was working. And, you know, the beginning of this story is it was basically January 1st. This place was outside of Baltimore. It was freezing cold, you know, and it was like, you know, you're spending New Year's in a friggin' halfway house. It's not like great vibes all around that day. And they're like, hey, who doesn't have a job? If you don't have a job, get out there right now and go find one. It's January 1st. Nothing's open. So we're walking around and we're just basically like loitering, you know, for like 4 hours. And so we come back home and then January 2nd, they're like, well, we want you guys out like a street team, find a job. So January 2nd, things are they're back open again. And I was walking down the street and there was this, you know, the big Statue of Liberty who waves outside this place called Liberty Tax, right? He's dressed like a statue. And I was like, you know, screw them. I'm going to get this job and really stick it up their ass. And I went in there and I couldn't get the job. The guy's like, no, like you can't work here. And I was leaving and he goes, hey, he said, do me a favor. He said, come back in a week. He's like, they usually quit. I was like, what the heck? So I literally walked out of there and I went to I saw Kentucky Fried Chicken and I was like, let me go in there, you know. And I walked into the Kentucky Fried Chicken and this woman named Sharika interviewed me to get a job. Well, first of all, I filled out an application and I got a call. So I went back. It was a process. So I went back and Sharika interviewed me. And as I'm talking to this woman, she's like, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Oh, like family. You're making up lies." And she's literally like doing her nails while she's talking to me. She's thinking like, this guy's so full of it. And the reason is because Sharika, and this is like, one of the many God winks in my life, was an alum of a recovery house in that area. And now she was a manager at the KFC. And she was like, you know what? This guy's part of the recovery community. I'm going to give him a shot. And and then I got the job. So I started to work at KFC. Hold on, you came back. I started to work at KFC and, first of all, I wouldn't let Sharika out from like 3 feet because I was so scared because I didn't know how to work the register. The register is like the Millennium Falcon, it's like trying to fly that thing. I was terrified. And it's like the fight or flight comes in. Like I'm 34 years old, 33, whatever. And there's a long line at KFC and I run to the bathroom because they don't know how to work the register. I'm like, I got to go to the bathroom. They're like, dude, get back here. And, and by the end of the time I was at KFC, I was screwing with people and playing jokes on them because, like I said, I was thriving in recovery. I was going to meetings. I had a sponsor, and this one guy came towards the end of my time there, and he was like, he's being a real dick, He's like, "Hey, what's going on?" He was a customer, and I had the headset on, and he's like, "What's happening? What's the delay?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, sir. One of the chickens is loose in the back. We're just trying to corral it." He was like, "You guys got chickens back there?" I'm like, "No, dude, relax. Like, we'll get to you in a second." And that's the change, though, right? I mean, and that was from day one to like the last day of the 4-month stint working at KFC. And then, Biz, my life just really started to change. I moved from that area outside of Baltimore. I took a job. Stephen Smith, who owned a catering company out in New York City called Table Tales at the time. He was like, "Hey, you can come work for me." He gave me and this other guy, Tim, who's still one of my best friends, still sober. Tim and I went to caring together. We went to the extended care place together. And I think you met him at one point. And then we went to live in Jersey City and work for Stephen Smith for a while. And, I was going to a ton of meetings in Hoboken and New York City. I was just on fire with sobriety. I was going home. That's probably around the time I met you. And I was believing in myself. And I started to reach out to my old contacts. One of the biggest breaks I got, I was kind of doing public relations for Table Tales, Stephen's catering company. And, eventually I got a job working back in the NBA under that umbrella. I worked for the NBA Development League. Billy King, who was the general manager of the 76ers when I was there, gave me an opportunity, helped me get an opportunity with he was a GM of the Nets at the time. So I worked for their developmental team, calling games, broadcasting them, which is always what I wanted to do. After that opportunity, I ended up working for the NBA a little bit. Like they would contract me. I worked Las Vegas Summer League for a couple summers. I mean, one time, this is a kind of a cool story I haven't thought about in a while. I was at the Summer League in Las Vegas, and Chris Mullin, who was open about his sobriety and his recovery, I knew Chris Mullin was sober. He's an NBA Hall of Famer, played at St. John's, he played for the Warriors. He was in NBA front offices. At the time, he was working for the Sacramento Kings, and I needed to interview him about something going on during my work. So I interview him, we're talking, and he doesn't really, he's like, okay, he does it, it fulfills his obligation. And we get done, and I'm like, Chris, I was like, I'm an alcoholic. The cameras are away. I'm like, I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, I'm a year and a half sober. And like his eyes lit up. He's like, and I was like, he's like, you getting the meetings out here? I was like, no, I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any. And he's like, oh, there's one he pulls out an app. There's one at Harris. You can go. I was like, all of a sudden it's like an alcoholic talking to another. And like, that is like, and that little like wink with like, there were so many of those things, as that happen in your sobriety. Because I'd been in Vegas staying at the Cosmopolitan for like 10 days and I hadn't been to a meeting. And I was literally asking another alcoholic for help. I was like, Chris, man, I'm jammed, And he was like, get to a meeting, dude. And the next day I got to a meeting. And the guy who picked me up, this is a great snapshot of AA, who picked me up at the hotel. Oh no, I jogged to a meeting. This guy, Russ, drove me home and picked me up for the rest of the week, took me back and forth. And that's AA. And, you know, I went from working for the NBA, just doing some freelance stuff for them and the development league. And then I got a job back in Charlotte working for the Hornets, where I got to go back there, you know, and I told you the story about, you know, just ripping through that place and losing opportunities. You know, there was one actual instance where I was back there sober, probably 3 years at the time or 4 years. And Michael Jordan walked by the hallway, down the hallway. And again, just like he would pass me before, he was with another guy who knew my name. And the guy was like, "Hey, what's up, Pete?" And I was like, "Hey, Buzz, what's up?" And Michael was like, "What's up, man? What's up, Pete?" And he slapped me on the back. And I was sober. And I was like, thank God. You know, like, talk about like another opportunity.
So I have so many questions I want to get to. For one, I feel like when you were talking about being at KFC was when you really started to like yourself again. You were like, I know I'm all that in a bag of chips, but really I wasn't. I wasn't all that in a bag of chips. I was really deep down inside a drug addict. And here I am working at KFC. This is where my life has brought me to. I don't know what this is or what I'm doing, but I'm going to fall into it. And like when you told the story about the chicken, it was like that self-esteem came back, right? The life came back. And I in your story, because we all get to this place, like, I'm so busy, I can't make a meeting. I can't make a meeting, but Chris Herring gets put in front of you and you're like, holy shit, that is the answer, going to a meeting. But our head will say no, right? My head says, no, I got this. Look at me. I got my stuff back. I go 10 days without a meeting, but by the grace of God, like Chris was put in your life.
Yeah.
And and you hear that throughout your story. And I'm going to fast forward us because I don't want to keep everybody for 2 hours listening just because we could go on for 2 hours. But I want to bring it up today and talk about how, you know, I want to bring back the shame, because there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that don't go to 12-step meetings. And there's a lot of people out there in the world that don't want to go to 12-step. You know, AA doesn't have the best rap that's going out there in the world. We know that. And what do you think it was that kept you from telling people the truth about yourself, about the fact that you are an alcoholic? And
when I was in active addiction, or
where you are today. And I think, because I want to bring up the fact that you now have a podcast.
Yeah. Well,
and that's similar to this. And you were finally able to say, this is me. This is the whole Pete.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a great question. And you know, you were helpful with that. I was back, you know, before I started to do TV news, you and I had linked up when I was back in Philly, and you had this theme, you know, sober, not ashamed. And you would have these speaking engagements where you were trying to break the stigma on alcoholism and drug addiction. And I would do some speaking during those events. And, you know, you joke about it and say nobody was there, but I was there, and it worked for me. I mean, I was really invigorated by that, and it made me want to break the stigma. But as my career progressed, I was a little worried about it, because I was like, you know, I'm not important enough in my job realm, right? I'm a news anchor now in Central Texas. I'm not on World News Tonight, where if I come out and I say, hey, if I tell this story, nobody's gonna like people are gonna be freaked out. Like you tell normal people what I just told you. I mean, and I don't tell people in that graphic detail, you know, all the time, ever really. But I was worried about that. You know, there was a fear. And so I wanted to start a podcast. And I will say this, I talked to the general manager at my station. I talked to other alcoholics about it. I talked to the general manager of my station. I said, look, I'm looking to do this. And honestly, Biz, I didn't know the positive backlash or anything that will, not backlash, but I guess the positive wave of momentum that will come from the decision. My general manager was like, do it. And I was like, I'm just going to interview other people. I'm not going to talk about myself. He was like, talk about yourself. He said, if you think you can help people, he's like, talk about your experience. And, you know, they actually did like an article on me here when I got, you know, and other news outlets picked it up. And, you know, people like you experience are like, thank you for opening up, you know, thank you. Because You said it on my podcast, The Payoff with Pete, by the way. You can get it on all platforms. You said it, so many people are like, my brother, my sister, my daughter, my nephew, they are a drug addict or they're in recovery, but don't tell anybody. It's like, dude, we got to tell people, it's not. Now, if you tell me not to tell anybody, I'm never going to say anything. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it wouldn't hurt to, it's not like somebody's a serial killer. They're sick. These are sick people. I was a sick person. There's no shame. Somebody asked me that recently. I was like, no, like they were talking to me about somebody they know and they're drinking and drug addiction. I was like, you're dealing with a sick person. It's almost, unfortunately, you've got to picture them as somebody in a wheelchair with a debilitating physical ailment that it doesn't, that keeps them from moving and functioning like they should. That's how bad this stuff is.
Well, and it's interesting. I'll tell you that someone just said to me, I had this person come to my house and she's going to help me do some stuff in my gardens, whatever. And so she walks up the door and she's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have a new friend and you're sober. Cause everybody knows I'm sober. I tell everybody I'm sober. Like,
yeah. I love that about you. I love it.
And she was like, well, I have so many friends that are alcoholics, And I said, dude, I'm an alcoholic. I'm just sober. In reality, I am still an alcoholic, right? Deep down inside. Yeah. And the fact that you've gotten to where you are today, it's just a testament that you can't give up, right? You can never give up. And never. You always have hope, right?
Yeah, well, you always have to have hope and you have to keep going. You have to keep, I'll say another, you just have to keep going. I mean, I want to show you something. A friend of mine, actually, I did a podcast, the Dreamcatchers podcast, and they sent me this because I told them, they said, what's the one thing that you love? The slogan. And I said, keep going. And they sent me this beautiful candle with the words keep going on it. So I'm expecting a nice gift. And mine to you is in the mail, right? After you did my podcast. Yeah. But I mean, that is, that's it. Just keep going. Even, in life after sobriety too. I mean, because look, you and I are pretty positive people and we really try to accentuate the positive. And, we're lucky, Biz, when we wake up in the morning without any substances and stuff, I'm pretty positive. And not everybody's like that. And I'm not always like that. I have to wake up at 2 a.m. for my job. I have some crappy days where I feel like I'm going around in like a fog. But I know the next day will come and I know I'll feel better. Your feelings are like the weather, a friend of mine said in sobriety, right? You can't control them and they always change. Like, and that's a God thing too. You just got to turn it over to God. I could go on forever. You know that.
I just have to say, this has been so awesome. This has been so awesome. And I want the people to know that like, you did this. You were a drug addict. Now you're on TV. It's like, it's possible.
Yeah. Tomorrow night.
Street urchin, not every person that's an addict is on the street, just so everybody knows.
No.
And you do this. And you might not like your first meeting you go to. I always like to point that out to people because people are like, I didn't like that. I didn't like the people there. I felt weird. But what happens if you don't like a meeting? What do?
You go to the next meeting. I mean, so you keep going. It's like, you find another one. And literally, the one more thing I'll say, I'm calling baseball games tomorrow and Sunday for ESPN Plus here, like in Texas, and like that's all like, and those people know I'm sober. It's just like I've been open about that with the folks I work with there. I mean, everybody knows, and it's all good, and I just keep showing up.
I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited about your podcast. I'm really excited for you, and I'm excited for your whole life. I mean, we're so blessed. It's beyond control. And you know what, Pete? Keep doing it. Okay? Keep going. Keep going.
Don't cross myself this time.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
Won't go quiet. Perfect waves on your own. Keep riding on to a present state of mind.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.
Are you a podcaster? Let's talk podcast hosting. Are you tired of your current podcast host? Need real support in a community that gets it? At Rogue Media Network, we offer top-tier podcast hosting services to help you thrive. From hosting and distribution to dedicated support, we've got you covered. Starting as low as $25 a month. Join our community of passionate podcasters today. Contact us at hello@roguemedianetwork.com.